So, hello and welcome to the US Election 2020 podcast from the Norwich Economic Podcast. This is a podcast kind of explaining how the US election is going to affect economic policy in the US and how a Biden administration will be different to a Trump administration on different policies like trade policy, climate change policy, and healthcare. We have two great guests with us today. We have Professor Fabio Rico and Associate Professor Farasat Bakari. Fabio will be talking more about the kind of trade and climate change element, and Farasat will be talking more about healthcare policy. But it's really an informal discussion on the US election and how it is for the US and how it is for the world from an economics perspective. I'm James, I'm a second year economics student. My role today is just to throw the questions at the guests and let them answer. And kind of get the questions that yourselves have in the comment section and kind of throw it at them as well and keep the debate going and the discussion going. Please do ask questions in the comments and I will get them to the guests as quickly as possible and at the end in a kind of big Q&A section. So to start off with, I'm going to pose a question to both Fabio and Farasat, kind of saying, how do you two view the Trump administration's ability to deal with the US economy over the last 4 years? And how do you think a delayed Biden transition may affect the US economy? Fabio, if you want to start off with it. Well,
most certainly from the productive sector point of view, the American economy has been booming since 2016. That can be imputed directly to the merits of Trump that still remain to be discussed. Most certainly it's true that the budgetary position, so the public finances are in better order, and that will allow Biden to make use of that if he wishes, something that perhaps was a bit more problematic but when Trump went in office. Most certainly as a labor economist, what concerns me the most has been that the degree of inequality, which is already one of the highest in the whole world, has increased further. I mean, tax rebates have favored the wealthy, and this is no surprise. This is something that Trump advertised very clearly in his campaign, and he put through. So of course, with the onset of the pandemic and with the delay, Trump actually intervene into this kind of problem. Most of these benefits have been probably displaced already, and so a lot of what is done has been undone, in my opinion, very, very quickly. I don't know whether Farasat agrees with me.
No, I totally agree. I mean, these are very valid points. I don't disagree with any of them, but rather than repeating these, what I will second them and then say that as far as I can see, certainly the transition is being delayed and it will have a little bit of effect. But by and large, President-elect Biden has put together a team that is well versed into these issues. There are a lot of the players are the same players that we've seen in Obama government, as well as some of the staffers from Hillary Clinton's State Department, etc., are also potentially coming in. So I expect that a lot of these people will be able to hit the ground running. So despite these delays that we are seeing, they are professionals. They will be able to catch on quite quickly. The GA funding that was held up for so long, which is only about 6 million or so, it's not the funding per se that matters, but it is the rest of the infrastructure that was being delayed that does matter. But let me back up one step more and talk a little bit about the general state of affairs and how this election was conducted and where it was going. The way I see it, Donald Trump has so far still refused to accept election results and instead called them fraudulent and rigged. That he was going to do that if he lost, he made it clear well before the elections. This was not a surprise to anyone. In fact, many feared over the last several months that perhaps he will call off the elections or not let the minorities vote by sending in his own goons, or require army to step in and help him somehow stay in the office. People were fearing military coups, or order those in the administration not to acknowledge the win by Biden and not help him anyway and not give up their positions, or challenge the election outcomes in courts all over the country and have his own installed federal judges be placed in those positions so that when the cases get kicked up to Supreme Court, where again he places justices, the victory is handed over to him. But the key thing over here in the case of US is that the oath of allegiance one takes in the United States is not to a person. It is to the Constitution and to uphold the laws. And the elections did go on as they always have for the last 240 years. Even in the times of war, elections have taken place. Even during world wars, they've taken place. Currently, no military members stepped up to his aid. No justices, no judges have stepped up to his aid. There are nearly 40 cases that he has initiated in different state or federal courts. And of those 40 to date, only one has come out in his favor, even on a small point, but not overall. So he's being handed victory left, right, and center on all of these, including by Republican judges. We've been hearing a lot about the Pennsylvania cases. Again, all of those were Republican judges. So as far as I'm concerned, the beauty of the American system is that if you lose the election on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, as they like to say it, then early in December, you get an informal notice that the landlord wants you to move out. And then in December, after the official count of electoral comes in, a more formal notice is sent to you. Think of this formal notice as an eviction notice sent by registered mail. And if you're still found in residence after 12 o'clock at noontime on January 20th, then the local security can escort you off the property that you are trespassing. So despite the affront to democracy and institutions that Donald Trump has made, the democracy and institutions did prevail, and there will be a new sheriff in town starting January 20th, which will be President-elect Biden. So this is not to deny that there is much to be improved in the land of the free and the home of the brave. This current summer itself showed us that BLM movement alone highlights so much of the social and racial injustices that have been going on in this country's long past history and have often been ignored for very long periods. But the point is that despite its weaknesses, Donald Trump will not make this country any worse and harm its institutions, as people have feared. He was not the cause. He was the effect of long-standing problems that have been going on. That's how I see that this thing is going to move forward. And I think on day one, you will see the Biden team respond to these issues. They will put in a lot of effort towards these injustices and will be able to move in transition teams that will take care of COVID-related problems and other things that have been ignored for so long.
Definitely. I think Ruth just put a comment in which would be quite interesting to pose to both of you quickly before we move on to the main topics. And that is, as you say, a lot of the appointees that Biden has made in his team, both from Secretary of State to his communications team, his background team, a lot of them are similar appointees to the Obama regime. And there's that kind of potential risk that it will be just a continuation of Obama. It won't be something that's new and fresh, which many Democrats like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren mentioned in the primaries. They wanted something new. Is there the fear that Biden could just be Obama 2.0?
Well, yes. I mean, there is also something new, though, because, for instance, if you consider the amount of female that have been appointed in the communication team, if I'm not wrong, is all composed of female officers. Janet Yellen was actually, well, she was the former chief of the Fed, and she's now the head of Treasury, which, yeah, to many might sound like reheated soup, but she was, in my opinion, extremely clever as leading the Fed, and probably she's going to do even better at the Treasury. And in a period in which America has experienced so much division, because let's remember, I mean, Trump is over, but Trumpism is still pretty much there in the United States. A message, a reassuring message to Americans and to the rest of the world might not be a bad choice after all, in my opinion. Farasat, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think, yes, it is the same. A lot of same people are going to come in, but with, as he said, he himself is a transitional president, or he will be a transitional president to the next generation and the new types of leadership that's going to follow. And President elect Vice President-elect, Kamala Harris is a prime example of that, because obviously he's going to hand on the reins to her, and it will be a transition. But right now, yes, we have the same team. There is going to be tension inside the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is very big, just as the Republican Party is extremely big. They both have very large umbrellas. While on the Republican Party side, you see transition or internal fights going on with the Tea Party or the Trumpsters or so on. On the Democrat side, you also have exactly the same problems going on, that there is a large contingent of people, roughly about 40% or so, which supported which supported Bernie Sanders' side of the campaign, or the more left wing of the campaign. And that tension will be there. But for now, the side that won in, which was more of a centrist, is bringing in the same old team. But this may not be a bad thing, as Fabio said. It may be the refried soup, but sometimes good experienced people is better than bringing in your daughter and son-in-law. They might be new in town, but at least they're not related. Far as I know, President-elect Biden has so far not elected or placed his daughter and his son-in-law in any cabinet position.
And Philomena makes kind of the same point in the comment section, saying that sure, it's a good thing that they are experienced, because they're not kind of government amateurs. Like, they know what they've done. They've been there before. They've kind of been there potentially for 8 years in a different form in the Obama administration. So they know the workings of government much better than I think a lot of the Trump administration did. And Lucas asked a good question, but we'll leave that to the end in the main Q&A, because we're going to head on now to the kind of main section of the podcast. And this section is more directed at you, Fabio, but of course, Farasat, if you want to interject, please feel free. It's kind of a good discussion. My first kind of question, and the main kind of question for this topic, Fabio, is how do you think a Biden presidency will affect US trade policy across the world?
All right. So first of all, we just have to clarify that I got quite a difficult task, because Biden has been very, very careful, and so far there hasn't been any kind of official announcement about what is going to be the trade policy. I think that one of the things he said very clearly, which I agree on, is that he's going to focus on reestablishing internal equilibrium and focusing on COVID issues, which are, of course, much more pressing, before moving on rebuilding international equilibria, which is precisely what he should do. So we are in the domain of speculation here, and there is no official position. That said, I think that the whole world welcomed Biden's election as a signal that tensions are going to be de-escalated, that America is going to become being best buddies with everybody. I will say that perhaps not with such a strong narrative, perhaps not with such a boastful tone, but still, the international trade policy of Biden is just going to put America at the center of the scene. And it's been very interesting how over the campaign, the tones and the position of Biden's have been probably spin doctored from a much more friendly tone to a sort of much more realistic position on what is going to be the evolution of the relationship. So I wouldn't expect a radical change in the aims and objectives of the international trade policy. What I expect to be a change is in the way this is going to be put in place. So Donald Trump has never been a person for multilateral agreements. So as a businessman, he's just working one-to-one with the specific countries. What Biden has sent as a message is that he is most certainly going to revert that and engage more with multilateral debates, and that is something that is stated very clearly. Nevertheless, one of the few statements that he gave was on the line: United States holds 25% of the global trade volume. And what basically need is actually entering in agreements and entering partnerships so that we can control at least another 25% or more of this. And then we were going to start to conduct our trade policy, because the alternative will have China actually ruling, which is already quite a statement compared to his initial position. So the Chinese authorities have sort of timidly sent a signal that they are open to discuss with Biden. But Biden has been extremely careful, and so far there hasn't been any kind of open discussion. And what we have to keep in mind is that we have to see this situation from a strategic point of view. That we like it or not, and that Biden likes it or not, and the American like it or not, Trump set up quite an aggressive trade policy. I mean, China, of course, is always at the center of the scene. You know, very strong tariffs. Even though these tariffs are basically ending up being paid by American consumers.
yeah, definitely. I was going to say that actually about what do you think about the kind of way Trump has dealt with China and with trade policy beforehand? Because I know, as you say, it's very difficult at the minute to know what Biden's going to do because it's very well orchestrated until he becomes president. But how do you view how Trump has dealt with trade over the last kind of 4 years?
Well, it's extremely. I mean, it's extremely difficult when you talk about international trade amongst all the branches of economics. This is the one that commingles the most with consideration about international politics. So it's not just about economics itself, but it's what you say, isn't it? And of course, you know, this boastful statement actually work on the electorate. So the fact that you are at war, even think about, you know, the kind of narrative when you talk about international trade is about war. It's, you know, the whole narrative takes a particular shape and a particular form, isn't it? Yeah. But as a matter of fact, even Trump entered in some sort of international agreements, because he basically sets up a Quad agreement with the countries that are sort of suspicious about China. So Australia is in this group, Japan is in this group, New Zealand is in this group. And I mean, needless to say, I mean, recently on the news, we've seen an escalation of the tensions between Australia and China. Most certainly the United States are not going to take a position pro-China right in this moment, because the whole international equilibrium is already set up in a particular way that it would be not advantageous to do so. So what I will expect is Biden proceeding very slowly and very carefully, engaging in much more of the multilateral discussions, but still ensuring that, you know, all this process is in order to reestablish American supremacy in the international trade world. So you know, we have to be a bit disillusioned about you know, the very good news that we had. You know, things are not going to change as much as we expect. But the other thing is that, you know, think from a game theoretic, from a strategic point of view, that you like it or not, you are in a situation where you are in this strong position. If Biden is going to start to de-escalate the process, he's going to do it by bargaining. So the idea is going to be, okay, we are going to waive or we are going to lower this tariff, but what you're going to do for me in exchange, which would be irrational for any country not to do so. You're in that position, so why should you give up your position so radically? So I would expect the process to be very gradual.
Yeah, definitely. And a question from Yeva, which may be tricky to answer, but it says, which countries do you think will benefit the most from Biden's kind of focus on multilateral trade agreements? If there are specific countries you think that may benefit from Biden now becoming president and didn't kind of hindered but potentially by a Trump administration?
Well, the ones that belong to the Quad agreement most certainly are. So Australia, New Zealand, and Japan are going to be part of it, and you know, Japan is going to be a very good ally for counteracting China as well. There is a bit more of uncertainty on what is going to happen with the large agreements. So Biden was the person who collaborated with the Obama administration for the formation of the Transnational Pacific Partnership. And now he's sitting on the fence, and there is still quite a lot of uncertainty on whether he's going to want to re-enter that partnership, which Trump wanted to leave. And on the other end, there is another partnership that is shaping up, and which doesn't promise the same reduction in tariffs, but at the same time, it involves these countries that we were talking about, so New Zealand, Australia, and Japan. And this is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which agreement was just struck a few days ago. So once again, you know, and of course, this is the rival bloc to the transnational partnership. So there is really still quite a lot of uncertainty on what is going to happen on that front.
Yeah, he will also need to be a little bit careful how he goes forward with the TPP, because previously, while he was interested in that, I think he will need to be careful now that he's got the Michigan vote, and he needs to protect that in the next election cycle.
Yeah, protect those jobs, which you know, when it comes to, because that's the thing with trade, as you say, Fabio, trade is always so heavily politicized, and politics is relied on so heavily, intertwined so much more than any real other area of economics. And quickly, kind of, I know this isn't related to trade, and climate change isn't maybe like your expertise, but I was going to ask about, we're talking about agreements, and Biden has said obviously he's going to join the Paris Agreement when he becomes president. And so do you think that obviously Trump has had a very kind of laissez-faire attitude to climate change, a climate change skeptic, hasn't really cared about it that much. Obviously Biden will be very much opposite. Do you think Biden's views on climate change could affect the US economy negatively or positively in either way?
Well, that's another interesting one, because in my opinion, Biden sent the right message, and we will have to see how the message is put into practice. So he's sent a message which is, of course, in favor of joining the Paris Agreement and rejoining the Paris Agreement and investing in renewable energy. But he also pleaded that he will favor that and invest in research and development in the United States to revive research in this kind of industry and favor so, for instance, sun and wind and water-based energy developments. So we don't know to which extent this is going to be followed up, but you know, going back to the previous point, there is more budgetary availability to actually invest in this kind of resources. And then, of course, you can combine it with some public policy and some you know, incentives like tax rebates. You could basically generate jobs that are based in this kind of new sector and replace some of the dependency on oil that has been so heating the debate during the election. So we will have to see whether Biden follows up with facts, but he could actually catch with this kind of policy two objectives with one. One, you know, the first objective is the one of realigning with the rest of the world in terms of climate change and environmental policies, and in the other one of steering the American economy away from oil, which is long overdue and is, I mean, basically forward-looking.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, talking about jobs in Michigan and stuff, like green energy brings around a lot of jobs, and it's that transition, I guess, that Biden would be much more likely to complete rather than Trump did. So if you don't mind, we'll go on to kind of Parasat and healthcare policy now, and kind of, again, this is kind of, I'm going to give an outlier question and we can kind of go with the flow. But during the pandemic, there's been like a response from the Trump administration that has obviously back in March and went into lockdown, but there was continuous attempts to kind of come out of lockdown earlier. And kind of, I guess the first question is, how do you view the Trump's administration's response to COVID and how they've dealt with it in the US?
Okay. So in terms of the COVID, I mean, we can think of it in 2 or 3 different subtasks or dimensions of it. The first is how they were dealing with the lockdowns and the businesses and so on. And over there, we saw that there was this narrative that was put forward, which was in terms of that you have to choose between healthcare or lives or whatever well-being or versus the economy, and both have their own costs and benefits. And this was some sort of a narrative which is not necessarily taken on by President-elect Biden's team. Their view is more that, look, this is not either or type of a situation. It is, you have to fix or take control of the coronavirus situation first and foremost. And only when you're doing that, along with this will come the economic recovery. They've already said that in terms of how going forward, they will have certain types of markers set in there, which they call that this is not a on-off switch, as they like to say it, that economy is not an on-off switch, but more like a dial. So they will have markers in terms of which way the things are moving before they bring in lockdowns or clamp up lockdowns and so on and so forth. So a little bit more like the European approach in some sense, what Boris Johnson also has been saying, that, implementation may be very different, but I'm saying that the idea is more like that. But in terms of the actual moving forward, they've also have certain differences in social distancing rules, in how and when they will open schools, in wearing face masks, etc. But let me start first with the most important one, which is the development of new vaccines and Operation Warp Speed that was started under Trump. When Operation Warp Speed was started, which was back in May, I think this is one of the more important, or initially more important, things that Trump was able to do, and he gets full points for that. I think he was able to bring about a lot of good. If we think about vaccine development, for instance, it takes roughly about 10 years, or it can take up to 10 years. The fastest known vaccine that we know that has ever been developed is 4 years. And so the idea was that let's put all our resources together. Let's bet on multiple horses. Let's invest in competing technologies in such a way that we can close this timeline to be 1 year. This has never been done before. This is like a moonshot almost. So under this program, they initially put in 10 billion under the Operation Warp Speed towards development, and giving that much money to competing technologies. So even, for instance, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine that we are hearing about in news a lot, even that got under the Operation Warp Speed from the Americans $1.2 billion. Oh,
wow, yeah.
Other companies that got a lot of money, Johnson & Johnson, which we hasn't hit, the target yet, they got 1.4 billion. Moderna got 1.53. No, they got 2.4, about 2.5 billion. Merck got another 38 million. Sanofi, etc. GSK got 2.1 billion. So they put in a lot of money on this, and that just adds up to about 7 or 8 billion. They've by now spent or allocated at least up to 18 billion by October alone. And this is to shrink these timelines. That typically when we do the development of vaccines, it's you do the pre-academic research or the academic research. From that, you do the preclinical research. Then comes the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. Then come the manufacturing of factories and after that, the distribution. So they've started doing all these things simultaneously to shrink this time, knowing very well that a lot of these will fail. And even if they fail, the idea is that even if one of them succeeds or two of them succeed out of all these different competing horses, we will be able to be up and ready and running. And that's what we're seeing. So President-elect Biden will benefit from what Donald Trump started on this front. However, where he did fail a lot was in testing and contact tracing. There, they were not able to do enough, which was extremely necessary, because that way you can shut down the right parts of the economy and do a lot more. So there, these guys have actually, the incoming team has now allocated or said that they will put in another 25 billion towards manufacturing and distribution, that they are going to set up a national team that will, national contact tracing workforce that they're going to set up. They're going to employ 100,000 new people who will be as part of this team that will go around doing testing, and that in itself will help the economy itself. The second part is in mask mandates. Mask mandates have two parts to it. One is physically that, we know the science tells us that it helps. And the second was the signaling that you were doing, that which side of the political spectrum you seem to fall in. If you dislike masks or whatever, you could tell very well that this person is probably more in favor of the Trump side. Not necessarily all Republicans, but certainly certain very heavy followers of Trump people would not do that, and the other side did. So there he's also, one did it by his own methods, by signaling, by wearing the mask, by getting his team to be wearing it all the time. But he's also said that he's going to try and mandate it. Now, there he's being careful with the wording. He says he's going to try and he's going to work with the governors. The reason for that is that he does not actually have the authority to mandate. In the US, the president does not carry that authority. That authority lies with the local and the state authorities. So it would be the governors and the mayors under the public health concerns. So he's going to try and nudge them in that direction. Along with the nudges comes certain authority that the Congress carries, and those are that you can hold funding or reward states with certain amount of funding under this thing. But that is open to legal challenges if you withdraw funds from one guy and give it to the other one. The second main change in direction that we're likely to see is under Obamacare, or what we might see what was happening to Obamacare. So just because people may not know what Obamacare is, Obamacare was an overhaul to the healthcare system in the US, came around under President Obama, got initiated in 2010. One of the big fundamental changes over there was that everybody had to carry their own insurance. And if you were not rich enough to have your own insurance, the government would provide you subsidies or make it easier for you. In return for everybody having insurance, the insurance companies were no longer allowed to do personal rating. So for instance, I may be in a poorer health, they can't give me a higher rate based on what my health status is compared to yours if we both live in the same area. So it had to be community rating. And of course, they said that you can't do anything like what they said related to pre-existing conditions, that you can't deny coverage based on that. So all this came in, but the legal challenges to Obamacare got started the day after the act was passed. The first legal challenge was posed at that point. And throughout President Obama's term, there were two types of challenges that were coming. One that were coming from the legislative side, meaning in the Congress. The other that were coming through going to the courts and saying this part is invalid or that part is invalid. The most important of these came in 2012, where they took one particular issue, which was a mandate that everybody must buy insurance. And they said that part is illegal, that the government cannot tell us what to do. And at that point, when it went to the Supreme Court, eventually to the Supreme Court, it came back with a 5-4 decision, or a ruling in 5-4, where a conservative justice, which was Roberts, Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice Roberts, he came out in favor of Obamacare, saying that, well, the individual mandate, because it comes with a penalty, that if you don't buy it, you will be penalized, there will be fined, is like a tax. And so it is covered under the Congress's ability to impose taxes. And because of that, it is perfectly legal. So he sided with the conservatives. Unfortunately, what's happened since then is that under many challenges that have come, the latest one under Donald Trump in 2017, they removed the penalty. They zeroed it out. So the law is still there, but the actual penalty that's imposed is zero. Because of that zero amount of penalty that is there, now the new challenge is basically come up saying that, well, if the penalty is zero, then it is no longer like a tax. And if it is no longer like a tax, then it is a government telling us what to do. So the government can certainly have the right to tax us, but they don't have the right to tell us how much broccoli to eat. And telling us to buy insurance is like telling us to eat broccoli. And we are Americans, we will not eat broccoli, not unless you tax us. So that part has been challenged. It's ended up in Texas. In Texas, the judge basically struck it down, saying that this is unconstitutional. It has from there gone back up to the Supreme Court now. And now the battle has become that in the Supreme Court, there are 3 items that are above them. They just had the hearing a few days ago, and they'll come back with the result in between sometime in spring versus summer, where they have 3 issues ahead of them, in front of them. One is that the parties that brought the lawsuit were they in legal standing? Are they capable of doing it? The reason over there is that you have to show that there was some harm done to you. And it is a difficult case to make that harm was done to you if the harm that you're citing is that I don't have to pay a penalty. So it's a really difficult legal maneuvering you have to do to show that because I don't have to pay a penalty, I was harmed. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that if you remove the penalty, is it still a mandate or not? Is it a legal mandate, or is it now like eating broccoli? That's the second thing that they have to decide. And the third and the final thing that they have to decide, which seems is the direction that they will go, is the issue of severability. That even if you have a law that has one bad component to it, that is unconstitutional, can we chop off that part and let the rest of the law stand? Because these guys are arguing that, look, if you throw away the individual mandate, then the whole thing comes falling down as the house of cards. And so the whole law has to be thrown out. So the justices are now looking at whether it can be severed, and the precedent says that usually it can be severed. In comes, basically the kick over here is that in comes Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who got affirmed in October 2020. She's the new player on the thing. So before it was 5-4, now it's become 6-3 conservative versus 6-3 conservative justices. So we have to see how she goes, because even if Roberts still holds up the old mandate, that will still become, instead of 6-3, it will become 5-4 in the other direction. And so the question is what parts she will throw out, what parts she won't throw out. So all eyes are on her now.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Yeah,
it's always the case, isn't it? Healthcare policy, economics, and politics, everything is so intertwined, especially in America.
Intertwined here, yeah. So yeah, it's going to be a really fun time to watch. But the good thing is that as far as legislative challenges hold up, they are not likely to be coming forth that easily, because even if they come through, the president can always veto them. Where they may come initially is that, where the Democrats can lose out on is that if they don't win the Georgia election, which is now the runoff election, which is the fight for the Senate, they may not be able to make any major changes over there in the healthcare reform, because there are certain other changes that President-elect Biden's team wants to bring about further reforms that they may not be able to do so easily without going into some sort of a compromise with the Republicans, with the Republican-held Senate, if in fact they lose Georgia.
Yeah, because that's obviously happening in January, isn't it? It's going to be a very close race, and then that will decide how the Senate is placed, and that will affect significantly what kind of laws can be passed, and especially healthcare, which it seems like healthcare is so like something that's always discussed in America. And one question that I was going to kind of pose to yourself and to Fabio as we kind of move into the Q&A section that I kind of thought about was, in the primaries for the Democrats, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, those on the kind of left of the Democrat Party talked about kind of universal healthcare and kind of having something similar to the NHS in the sense that there's free healthcare for all. What are your views on that for America? Do you think it would work in America, and do you think it's something that they would be economically viable for America to kind of pursue?
From about the economically valuable aspects, I'll leave Farasat to answer to this, because I think he's much more knowledgeable. But it's interesting because some conversation was going on in the side in the chat about what it means to be left, what it means to be Democrat, what it means to be Labour, and there are and there are different views coming up, which I think is very pertinent to this kind of question. So my own view is that, as I said, I'll leave it to Farasat to respond about whether it's viable or not, but will it be accepted by Americans? That's the question that I actually ask myself. I mean, we live in a world where even our own NHS, which we all hail and bring in high praise and glory, is actually changing. And it started to change with Tony Blair, and it hasn't stopped to change. And it's most certainly not what it was when it was built in the post-war period. So many more people now have BUPA, they have private insurance, and they are prepared to do so. I mean, I really struggle to imagine a world where you could do the reverse, and within the context of the United States. I mean, like people wouldn't be able to deal with that kind of reality. But as I said, I mean, I leave it to Farasat to get to the economic implication of that from a finer angle.
So my view is that in terms of America being ready or not, I mean, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on what Medicare for all really means and what Elizabeth Warren and so on were proposing. When it comes to these type of plans, we're talking about a single insurer versus multiple insurers. So the Obamacare has already resolved part of that problem or solved part of that problem. Everybody's supposed to have health insurance anyway. Now the question becomes whether the insurance provider is a private company or whether it's government funded. And there you are going to have a lot of people who are going to disagree on that thing for good reasons. I mean, there's a lot of reason why we believe competition can lower the prices. Where the problem comes in is the market stops working in a lot of areas. And we have to find those problems and solve those problems. So if it is a matter of that, should there be a government-provided healthcare plan universally, that I think more people are slowly going to come around to and accept that, as long as it is not that can be the only plan that will be provided. As long as that works in parallel to the private provision, then it will be okay. There, the second problem will come in that if there is a private provision and a public provision of this thing, can the two coexist at the same time? Or will there be some comparative disadvantages for the private insurance, and will they be automatically kicked out of the market because they can't afford it, because the government can subsidize things and so on? And those are the issues that will be harder to tackle with. But right now, as the situation stands, you saw that the people who are in favor of Medicare for all are mostly from the slightly left of center wing of the Democratic Party. Those consisted of roughly 40% of the Democratic Party. So it is not likely to be that easily in the offering in this current cycle. But one thing I can tell you is that I think once you provide a particular service as a right or something like that, it is extremely difficult to take away. The political thinking changes. So even if you are the most card-carrying marketeer saying everything should be done on private laissez-faire basis, once you've given them Medicare, they don't want you to take it away. So remember that Medicare is the component that is free for all above age 65. Medicaid is for the poor people. So those are government-funded huge programs already there. And under Obamacare, there were these exchanges, etc., that were also there. So I think it's only going to expand, but I don't think it will be done dramatically in one day. I think it will be slow, painful expansion of this process, but it will take some time, but we'll get there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And as most things in the US, it's always going to be slow and painful to get through Congress and to have a bipartisan agreement, I guess. But it's really interesting. And I think now is a good time to kind of open up to the House and ask everyone who's kind of watching, if you've got any questions on any kind of elements of the US economy and the effects of the US election 2020, throw them our way on the kind of chat section. We've had great debate in there, actually. I know there'll be some listeners on Spotify who obviously won't be able to see this chat, but we've had good debate about a variety of issues. I think Gusto has mentioned that on a Fox News poll, 72% of Americans want a government-run healthcare system, which I think is quite interesting. And as you say,
that's very good, yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
like
I didn't
and you
realize
say,
that, yeah.
Yeah, like how you guys are saying how kind of America will have, I think, seemed to shift as a public opinion will shift to a more kind of government central run healthcare system. Whilst we wait for maybe a couple of questions to come through, I've got a couple myself.
And even in the government-run healthcare, I mean, we have to be careful that there are 2-3 different layers of it. One is the insurance side of it. The other is the provision of healthcare itself. So under the provision of healthcare, we're not really talking about taking away private or hospitals and making them government-run or making the doctors become government employees or anything like that. The idea is only about the insurance so far. And there, I think the key thing where Obama government did not make too much of an improvement, and that's where I hope the Biden government moves forward, is that there were really two problems to the underlying healthcare problem in the US. One was the coverage, that not enough people were covered, not everybody had insurance, and those who just couldn't afford buying private insurance were left out in the cold, and some who were choosing to leave themselves out because they felt that they are young and not vulnerable and they're earning good money, why should they waste money on buying insurance and things like that. So that's the problem that the Obamacare did solve. The problem that it did not solve was the high and rising prices of healthcare, and they became much bigger. And that's the problem that needs to be tackled. And there, the number one problem is, unfortunately, not insurance companies, as is often played out in the media. The problem over there is lack of competition among hospitals and lack of competition among physicians. Those are the two big powerhouses over there. And we need to really take those on and try and foster more competition over there if we want to bring down the prices. So everybody who gets a charge from the hospital after being discharged of $4,000 or $5,000 for a night where some specialist saw you for 10 seconds or whatever, screams at their insurance company. But the problem is really occurring from the fact that it was the hospital that generated that large bill.
Yeah.
So that's the part that will need to be tackled with under the new government. And I hope that's where they will be making a greater effort.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always interesting when you hear those kind of numbers in this country at like the thousands of dollars that Americans have to pay for healthcare, because it's kind of crazy when you hear those kind of numbers. But we've got a kind of curveball question, I guess, which is more kind of international relations related, but you can involve economics in this on the basis of the US economy and the US election, from Sani, which says that what changes should we be expecting from the US military and the conflicts they're involved in worldwide due to Biden becoming president in January. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that at all? I know it's quite not economic specific, but if you had any kind of thoughts on that question.
That's a difficult one, because I mean, what we saw was this repentant change in the strategy and of like having all the troops returning home from different many critical areas, which I find quite worrying. Not to say that these troops had the right to be there to begin with, but it's like when you have these repentant movements, that is always quite problematic. I mean, I will say that, independently from the military position of the United States, what has been proven in terms of international equilibria as a very effective way to bring order and disciplines in problematic area, it's been economic sanctions, which, if you like, is an extreme to tariffs. You just basically ban certain countries from trading or with very strong limitation. So that is always been very, very effective. So I would like to see a return on that kind of environment in a situations where America is really struggling to boss and rule in the same way they've done in the past. So to a certain extent, you create more democracy at the international level. On the other hand, you create much more instability as well, and uncertainty about what are going to be the possible outcomes.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Parasat, do you have anything to add?
My thing is, I'm a little bit more concerned on some of those things. Somewhat assured also, but somewhat concerned as well, because if we look at one of the starting points that was made by I think Ruth, who made this, or someone else made the point, that if we look at the team of people who are coming in, they are the same people who were under President Obama. And if you particularly look at the team that is being composed and look at their CVs, where they were and what they were doing in the 4 years in between when President Obama was not in the office, you follow that team's CVs and you essentially see that it's the same folks that are coming in. They're doing the consulting in the meantime of the same type of firms that they were doing before. And it will be, I think, a return to the same policies overall, because we don't have a fresh, new, different type of people coming in saying, We're going to deal with the foreign wars and interventions in a different way. So what we saw under the 8 years of President Obama, I think we're going to see something similar.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that assures you or whether that worries you, but that's what it will be, I suspect.
Continuation.
Yes. I think we should clarify. I mean, there is a stake here because our first years are actually writing an essay on military Keynesian policies.
Oh wow! So this is going to be interesting to listen to.
But I think that the kind of military intervention that we are looking here, we are not talking about military intervention as the expenditure on the military and the impact of that expenditure has on the economy. We talk about military intervention in the case of the United States in terms of controlling, intervening, influencing, whichever word you want to choose, economic interest and economic equilibria outside the United States. So it's not about the expenditure that you sustain and the effect of that, but what is going to be the outcome in terms of international equilibrium. That is what is really interesting about the United States. So you shouldn't look at the effect of expenditure itself, but the outcomes of this military intervention, really. So yeah, I think for the benefit of the audience, it's worth to clarify that.
I hope some first years are here right now so they can use your wise words for their essays. I'm just going to, this is one other question we just had through, which kind of links to this, but kind of also links to kind of general government expenditure when Biden becomes president. And that is that, will Biden carry on the high military spending that Trump has done? And if so, will it be for defense or will it to stimulate the economy? So what are the reasons for it? And then if he's not going to do that, or kind of just a general question about what sectors of the economy do you think that Biden will focus on or should focus on, in your opinion?
Okay, I am more knowledgeable about the second part, but I can certainly say something about the first. So in terms of military expenditure, this is first of all, there is a variable that is exogenous, which is what is going to happen in terms of the international equilibrium and what is going to happen in the Middle East, and of course, every day you wake up and you find something new, and which is going to be a driver, of course. The second issue is in thinking about the kind of intervention. One thing that I really like about Biden and what he announced that his intention to do, and then we'll see if he follow through. So this idea of investing in high technology sector, that is a fair way to deal with international trade, rather than, and this is the reason why Europe was and the euro area was created. This is what a lot of European countries understood after the 70s, that you cannot carry on fighting tariff wars, and that the place where you have to compete is about technology. So the announcements that Biden is interested in investing in high technology profile sector is a welcome one. Once again, you can create jobs and you can compete in a fairer way, in a forward-looking way, developing your technology. So I think that there has been an announcement that this is the intention. We haven't seen anything yet. If it's followed through, it's the right policy to pursue. Yeah,
definitely. Faris, anything wants to add?
Well, I think some of the directions they will over time need to change, and they will need to. While I say that the old guard is still back into the office, and so some of the older policies will be embraced, but that is within certain reason or limits. Because one of the things that we do know, there are different estimates out there, but one of the estimates put the damage due to coronavirus to the economy somewhere in the ballpark of 8 or 9 trillion annually. Another one I saw, which was coming from a completely different estimation, was in the ballpark of, I think, 17 or 18 trillion. And when we're talking this large amount of losses that are coming in, I don't think it will be sustainable for them to carry on business as usual. A lot of this will have to be directed towards first dealing with the coronavirus problem, then providing stimulus money, doing it in a way where it goes not to become some sort of a tax relief for the large businesses, but actually goes to the smaller businesses and it goes directly to the workers, which is in their plans. They've been talking the talk a lot for a long time. But I think that's what they will do. Even within the military, when we say that how much of the budget will go to the military, I think the military budget itself is going to start getting directed towards a lot of other secondary uses, non-combat related uses. For instance, even in this Operation Warp Speed, the military or Department of Defense has been put in charge of the distribution of the vaccines when they come around. And that is a huge undertaking. They've tapped into the former generals who were in charge of logistics, etc., to undertake this. They've given them a lot of funding. So whether the new funding, how they manage it, whether it will pass through the military budget and given directly to them to take care of these things, or whether there will be separate funding that comes in that is given to them. So I think at least in the short run, it will not be business as usual. They really need to focus on this thing. The second thing that they do recognize, and I think the rubber will meet the road over here, is that they do understand that there is a climate disaster around the corner. If we think we got it bad with COVID-19, right around the corner is the environmental catastrophe waiting to happen, saying, here, hold my beer, I'll be right back. So we are just about to be hit with a new level of disasters. And I think American leadership in this will be very important. They have large resources available, and they will be deploying some of this through their military and some of these. So my point is that I'm hopeful that the government that is coming in recognizes these issues. They're fully aware of it. They have placed senior politicians or career professionals who are aware of these things, and they are taking these things on. So not only will they'll be putting money for these things, they'll be putting money for the next pandemics. They'll be linking back out to the World Health Organization. They, I think, will be also going to go and develop a worldwide strategy on dealing with these things, not just with this, but the next one will be an antibacterial catastrophe, because we're running out of antibiotics as well at the same time. So all these things are boiling up. So I think their focus will have to change, and they recognize it. The Green New Deal is already something that they've been talking about. I mean, the Biden, President-elect Biden team has had taken over essentially the Green New Deal that was being proposed by OCA and others. And those are the people who are writing back-end part of it. Now, there's a debate on it, how much it will cost and whether all of those things can be done or not, how many new jobs it will bring in and so on. But I think a lot of these things will become the focus. As Fabi was saying, I think they're going to focus a lot on the technologies that come out of it from as well. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's really interesting, talking about technologies and the different challenges that, you know, in the future for not just for in the US in general, but specifically healthcare, the different problems like COVID-19. Hopefully with the vaccinations, we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel, but this is not the only challenge that healthcare faces across the world. Fabio, do you have anything else to add before we close up, or are we all good to finish, you think?
Open up to questions, or we can call it a night.
I think we've reached our time limit. If there's any other questions, throw them in now. But I think we are going to finish here. Although we could discuss all night, I'm sure, if we wanted to. Actually, one more question. There's one more. We'll ask this question as well. That Lucas put in earlier in the chat that I meant to kind of come back to, and that was with Biden winning. Oh, we have lots coming through at once. With Biden winning a big victory by both the Electoral College and the popular vote, do you think there could be a similar swing here in the UK in the next election to Labour from the Conservatives? This is more of a political question, I guess, to end on. But what do you think on that?
It is. I mean, I think we had a little interaction in the chat where, I mean, my view is that the definition of left wing is very different all across the globe, and the kind of societal differences between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe are huge. So it's, I mean, in the United Kingdom, we were able to see people like Tony Blair leading a party, and at the same time Jeremy Corbyn. Will we be able to see something similar in the United States? I really doubt it. I mean, the only figure that we can think about is Bernie Sanders. But Bernie Sanders didn't manage to get anywhere near any high office. And what I was discussing in the chat is like he attempted, well, he was candidate to run the Ministry of Labor in the United States, and he's not going to be assigned that either. So I mean, when we think about the concept of left, we just have to think about very carefully about what do we intend for that. And considering that, you know, here in Europe, the crisis of the left wing is just basically affecting a lot of countries, like Italy for certain, and a lot of different countries. We should reflect upon what that kind of news from the United States would really change in terms of political equilibria. I strongly doubt that it's going to make any difference at all. And, you know, unfortunately, and what is really risky and the importance why we need to form bright young minds is that populism is replacing the left and the right and the center. And like misinformation, fake news, I mean, they have no political color, but they are very, very dangerous. And that is what we need to fight as academics. But I would just like to conclude, and I think this is really a nice opportunity for me to conclude, is that, you know, you know, we should stop talking to each other. I mean, academia and researchers are very important and covering a very important function, but we should just make sure that we communicate better with the public. So initiative like yours, guys, is really, really important. And making sure that we engage not just amongst each other, but, you know, with the people in the street, on Facebook, on any kind of device, to educate. That is what we need to do.
Yeah, 100%. And that is kind of the objective, I guess, of this podcast, is to reach new audiences and let more people enter discussions like the one we're having tonight. Yeah, 100%. Farasat, do you have any kind of closing remarks on the question?
Sure, I'll just make one last point about this question that Luke's asked. So, I mean, heeding the advice that, or the warning that, or the point rather that Fabio has made, that, you know, the definition of left is different in different parts of the world. I totally hear that. But let me just give you a simple thought experiment to think of this problem. That will these, given that there's been a victory of Biden in US, will it lead to victory in other parts of the world by similar parties or so on, or liberal thinking in general? Think of it this way. Every country, supposing, can take one of the two draws. They get a draw which is either a red or a blue, or a number 1 or a number 2, whatever. These are weak draws taken across 50 different countries, let's say. Now, do you believe that if I take a draw, it affects, and I get a blue, it somehow affects the probability that you will also get a blue? Question is, are these independent draws, or are there somehow these correlations that you might see, are they causally related? So my answer is that on the face of it, I don't think that anything that happens in the US has any bearing over here on the election outcomes per se. But there is an indirect small causal link that might be there. The small causal link that might be there is that certain type of policies enacted by one country, when they start affecting another country via trade or environmental policies or anything in which we have to cooperate, can change the position of that other country's policies, which in turn can lead to certain types of election outcomes in that country. So imagine if one country in Europe decided that they are going to close their borders to other countries in Europe and became extremely nationalistic. Well, if they become extremely nationalistic and start pushing those policies, the neighboring country who's getting affected because of that, some people in that country may also become extremely nationalistic, which would give rise to more nationalism over there. And so then these things can become correlated in that sense. But by and large, just from one or two incidents where we see, you know, a couple of populist governments came in power at the same time and they might be leaving at the same time, I'm not necessarily ready to yet draw that link that there's a causal link between them. It's more like timing just happened to be that way. That's where I stand right now on it.
Yeah, there's no real there's no causal path there. There's nothing saying
there
that.
might
And again,
be, but right now I don't see a strong causal pathway right now.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really, really interesting. And again, although we speak the same language as America, we are very different societies in how we kind of view our politics and the way our society is structured. So yeah, it's a very interesting point you guys make. I think that's kind of the end of today. I kind of want to finish on thanking both of you for coming tonight. It's been really, really interesting.
Organizing this.
No problem. I've had a really, really good time. It's been very, very interesting on all the different topics we talked about. I think it's been really, really good. I think hopefully it's been good for our audience, whether you're watching now or you're watching on demand. So thank you very much, Philomena. Thank you very much, guys. We will say goodbye now.
Thank you, Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you very much, guys. Look out for this. It's hopefully on Spotify soon. We've got more podcasts like this and on other issues like employability and student life coming up soon. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you soon. Goodbye, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.